Hello, bros. We're back with Mars Without Venus, a study of some homosexual generals by Major General Frank Richardson. He wrote this book, Napoleon Bisexual Emperor, which I found in the state sale one day, unsuspectingly, not knowing such books existed since I didn't really know much about Napoleon, but he followed it up with this book, I believe. So he was expounding on this fact. Yeah, this is like 7, 8 years after that book, so there's that. And I've read the first, I think, 5 chapters of this, but I've never completed it, so I guess I shall complete it now before I start the book on entertainment. Let me get this going it. Control V. Chapter 6. And we'll put the playlist Mars. Really should go back to doing my playlists. Alright, save. Let's put that on there. Put that on there. And then do this. Alright, bruv. Mars without Venus. I don't really want to smush this. I will hold it. Pause this. Cartoon. Victorian Heroes, Chapter 6, Victorian Heroes. General Charles George Gordon, 1833 to 1885. General Gordon has been the subject of many biographies, no less than 6 in the last 20 years. Obviously, this was from the 80s. The most recent by Charles Genevieve Trench should have a strong claim to be regarded as the definitive work, if that is possible in the case of this enigmatic man whose death gave rise to so much controversy. The title of Mr. Genevieve Trench's book, Charlie Gordon, seemed to hold out a promise of new revelations of a lovable side to the hero's nature. These were not, however, very noticeable. I cannot remember references to him as Charlie in any other books or stories about him. It is a kindly book in which no reputations are damaged. If that G.O.M. Gladstone, cruelly renamed Mog, murderer of Gordon, cannot be cleared of procrastination, he gets a fair hearing, and the cruel difficulty of his position can be understood. Sir Evelyn Baring, later Lord Cromer, was clearly patient and cooperative, though sorely tried by the many changes of opinion and plans made by his awkward subordinate without explanation or apology. It is Gordon's fellow soldiers who really show up in the worst light. Lord Wolseley, in his leadership of the expedition which should and probably could have saved Gordon, was bumbling and indecisive. And so was his vacillating subordinate, Sir Charles Wilson. Admittedly, their failure to push on was partly justified by Gordon's extraordinary and inexplicable signals, one of which read, "Khartoum all right." I like how I rolled that R. Could hold out for years. This was probably intended to mislead the Mahdi, who by then was intercepting most of Gordon's messages. The relief expedition was far from being all Sir Garnet, the popular expression for military excellence, but how different things might have been if Fred Burnaby had not been killed at Abu Klea. I don't think I'm going to read these. Maybe I will. Lieutenant Colonel Frederick Gustavus Burnaby of the Blues, a 6'2" thruster, was named the bravest of the brave, a nickname which he shared with Napoleon's equally dashing Marshal Michael Ney. From Mr. Genevieve, and I don't know why the British do not put a period after abbreviated words, but that seems to be the standard. Mr. Genevieve Trench's, and I hope that's Genevieve, Trench's exciting account of the campaign of the ever victorious army against the Taiping rebels, the best which I have read, it is easy to see how well earned was Gordon's reputation as the best leader of irregular troops in the world, and also his place in the pantheon of Victorian and Edvardian boys' heroes. Appropriately, Mr. Trench does not accept the usual picture of Gordon's death. Unresisting with passive Christian resignation, he believes that he went to his God not as a sheep, but as a soldier. There was a magnetic quality about Gordon's leadership, and his eyes, like Napoleon's, were his most striking and compelling features. Descriptions of Napoleon's eyes abound, but I cannot recall any about those of the man who beat him. John Colville, in his Portrait of a General, has remedied this with the following words of Miss Catherine Muir. He is fair, eyes of fine grayish blue. This does not sound fine, but they are so animated and keen. They quite look through you and are the beauty of his face. A civilian employee of the Royal Engineers thought that he unconsciously mesmerizes people to do his will. It is, I suspect, open to question if his leadership would have worked with British troops with whom he had little to do. He certainly took a personal interest in his wounded or sick soldiers, which Kitchener never did. Almighty evangelizing and disturbing tracts was altogether too unusual, though there seems to have been something about him and his obvious sincerity which warded off ridicule. He commanded a remarkable variety of soldiers in different nations and races, including American adventurers and soldiers of fortune. Surprisingly, in a man who successfully commanded Egyptian and Sudanese soldiers, whom he lumped together as Arabs, he spoke and read no Arabic. This contributed to his failure to comprehend the essentially noble character of the Mahdi, and indirectly perhaps led to Kitchener's deplorable desecration of that religious leader's tomb, which earned him a sharp royal rebuke. Baring, in a single sentence, crystallized the curious nature of Gordon's influence. He is certainly half cracked, but it is impossible not be charmed. It is impossible not be charmed by the simplicity and honesty of his character. Completely mad rather than half cracked was how he struck many others. Lord Northbrook said that nothing would have induced him to consent to Gordon's going anywhere if he had read Reflections in Palestine, the book of a madman. If that seems severe, the opinions which Gordon expressed about the true sites of the sacred spots in Palestine, and even more, the absurd pseudo-scientific rubbish which led him to locate the Garden of Eden in the island of Praslin in the Seychelles, qualify him for an honored place among the major British eccentrics. An acquaintance who said that Gordon had a bee in his bonnet considerably understated the case. Gordon's bonnet might have carried a notice to bees, standing room only. The soundness of his judgment and his advice to Baring was often questionable. The British public, who had pressed the government to send the popular hero, the Christian general, to the Sudan, were disturbed when he restored slavery, from a sense of the practical, and even asked for a notorious slave trader, Zubair or Zubar, to be made Governor General of the Sudan. Charles Gordon's father was a lieutenant general who had served in the Royal Artillery, and Charles was the fourth son of a family of 11 children. He was a lively boy, inclined to be a bully, a fault which cost him 6 months' seniority at the Royal Military Academy, and also his chance of following two of his brothers into the Royal Artillery. A hasty and eventually ungovernable temper was failing throughout his life. His temper and occasional violence have been contrasted by some writers with his popular aspect as a gentle soldier of God, writing letters stiff with scriptural quotations, usually to his sister. In Khartoum, yielding to a sudden access of fury, he struck an Egyptian officer's face. On another occasion, he kicked his Alsatian servant until he screamed. After boxing the ears of a telegraph clerk, he solaced him with $4 and later wrote that the man had said he didn't mind if I killed him. I was his father, a chocolate-colored youth of 20. From a leader of colored troops, there is a note of unpleasantness, even contempt, in that last remark. The same impression is conveyed by the fact that, for all his apparent love of his men, which they returned with adoration, it amused him to have the Sudanese soldiers brought in and shown their black pug faces in the palace looking glasses. Leighton Strachey quoted these rather unkind words from Gordon's Khartoum journal, which shows elsewhere that Gordon regretted his bad temper, especially when he noticed that his soldiers trembled in his presence. Much of his conduct and the severe floggings which he inflicted on slave traders suggest a sadistic streak in his character, but this must be seen against the background of the customs of the country at that time. It was not only during his last months that his mind was disturbed by remorse and feeling of guilt. Mr. Trench makes light of the death wishes upon which other authors have dwelt at length. Patrick Turnbull, for example, discerned a death wish as the central motivating force in Gordon's life, which supplanted in his nature any attractions which he might have felt for the opposite sex. To Anthony Nutting, the death wish suggests a desire for martyrdom, which can be traced throughout his life. An Anglican clergyman who knew and admired him compared him to a medieval mystic on account of his godliness, his distaste for the body, his longing for death. It seems reasonable to see a connection between these longings for death, even martyrdom, and the fervor with which he embraced religious faith, a depressing feature of attendance at Christian churches is one's unvarying sinfulness, or so it has seemed to me since my school days. We had a fine chapel and had to go there twice daily. In the morning we confessed to being miserable sinners and were duly absolved. But in the evening there we were again, miserable sinners. In the intervening hours there had been few opportunities for erring, straying, or for miserable sin, and most of us avoided it for fear of the consequences. Gordon wallowed in remorse and penitence. A fanatic in almost everything he did, he became fanatically religious. He adhered to no sect and rebuked the established church for its lack of guidance and leadership. He himself was guided only by his Bible, from which he was never parted, and in which he could find justification for any line of conduct which appealed to him. At times, he was, and I quote, and I can't turn the page, but I quote it, and he was tortured in his own sinfulness, and his conduct verged on religious mania. He would distribute tracts, pressing them on strangers as well as on friends, scattering them in streets and fields. All this began when he was stationed at Gravesend. Leighton Strachey, I'm butchering his name, I'm sure, believed that from that time, for the rest of his life, he was searching for an answer to the question, what was the will of God? He recognized his vaulting ambition and said, yes, that is flesh, that is what I hate, and what makes me wish to die. Gordon seems to have been of a neurotic disposition. According to Mr. Genevieve Trench, he had a slight stammer, which is sometimes a pointer. He was a hypochondriac, worried a lot about his digestion, and believed himself to have angina pectoris, which often recurred in times of stress. His heart is said to have been sound in his anginal pains, and probably and probably also his indigestion may have been caused by heavy smoking. Richard Garrett, who writes about Gordon's health, describes something like a stroke of paralysis when he was in equatorial Africa. Gordon himself attributed this attack to smoking. Perhaps it was a form of heat stroke. When he returned home from Egypt in 1880, he believed that he was in a state of nervous exhaustion. Gordon never gave up smoking, but suggestions that he was also an alcoholic may be unjust. The waspish Leighton Strachey, whose eminent Victorians held the mirror of truth before some respected figures, is not unsympathetic in his treatment of Gordon. Who could be so to a man whose end was so tragic? His picture, however, is of a man facing his death with a muddled mind, clouded not only by evangelistic vaporings, mysticism, and a very personal interpretation of the scriptures, but by tippling as he awaited his fate. Bible in one hand, brandy bottle in the other. Gordon certainly drank brandy pretty freely, even at breakfast time, which is rather suggestive. The same breakfast time tippling and a bottle or more a day were described by associates of Prince Charles Edward Stuart, especially when peevish and disgruntled and noticeably ungrateful to those who risked their lives for him. He was in flight after his defeat at Culloden. Gordon, from stories told by many acquaintances, would frequently say, "Have a B and S," on meeting a friend at a time when "have a drink" was not, as so often today, the first words after a greeting. But only those to whom alcohol is sinful could blame a man in his situation in Khartoum for drinking, even drinking heavily. Whether or not his mind was fuddled, it was certainly muddled. His Khartoum journal certainly does not reflect the popular notion of the nation's hero, the saintly soldier of God awaiting salvation in resigned patience. As well as recording daily events, it is an extraordinary farrago of responsible speculation about the future of the Sudan, criticisms of the government, and others. Evangelistic ramblings, regrets for past mistakes, and many other matters are relevant to his awful situation. It may indeed suggest the influence of all that brandy, but it is more charitable to compare it to the so-called flight of ideas, which is characteristic of mental instability. I think it is very likely, even almost certain, that the source of Gordon's tortured preoccupation with his sinfulness, his guilt complex, as Patrick Turnbull calls it, was repressed homosexual feelings, a delicate subject discussed by more recent biographers. Anthony Nutting observes that there is not likely to be evidence of such leanings, since the subject was unmentionable in the Victorian era. However, Mr. Chenevix's Trench refers to whispers even in his own day that Gordon's devotion to boys exceeded the philanthropical. Lord Elton guardedly wrote that many lies were told about him, and even his moral character was not spared. It was while he was serving in Gravesend that God conveniently revealed his will, with the help of a pious couple, Mr. and Mrs. Freeze, with whom Gordon was friendly. Gordon conceived it to be his mission to help poor boys and orphans. He took them into his official residence, fed and clothed them, and prepared them for careers, usually in the merchant navy. He continued to take a personal interest in them all his life. The author of a recent television play about Gordon's death in Khartoum introduced as a fictional character one of these boys who was shown making his way into the beleaguered residency to share his hero's hours of trial. Gordon called these boys his kings, doves, or scuttlers. The last term calls to mind the little ball boys at the Wimbledon nets. He referred to them frequently in his letters. At Gravesend, there were eventually so many of them in Fort House that he had to engage an assistant. The drain on his resources was considerable. He opened the boys' club, which occupied all his spare time and restless energy. At first, he did everything for these boys himself, bathing them and even mending their clothes. Anthony Nutting writes that there was in Gordon a scoutmasterish quality which made him want to help young people. Lord Elton pointed out that Boys had always attracted him, and he understood them better, and so was gentler with them than he was with women or even men. When I read about Gordon's practice of personally scrubbing these youngsters in their baths and standing them in front of a mirror before clothing them, I thought of my infantry captain in India and his odd habits with the band boys, chapter 2, page 39. Gordon's ostensible purpose was to show them that they were now bodily clean and must become new boys in their minds as well. It certainly does point to pedophilic tendencies in this lonely bachelor with his positive dread of marriage, hatred of society, and extreme shyness, especially with women. Leighton Strachey, referring to Gordon's fondness for boys, ragged street Arabs, and rough sailor lads, wrote that his unassuming figure, short and slight, with its half gliding, half tripping motion, gave him a boyish aspect. Strachey repeatedly referred to Gordon as tripping, an impression which may have been conveyed by Gordon's somewhat childish avoidance of stepping on the lines or cracks in pavements. Homosexual men are often particularly attracted by the types of male indicated by Strachey's rough sailor lads. We need expect no surmises about homosexuality from the high priest of the Bloomsbury group. Well, though he may have understood it, but he may here have hit upon a significant point. Immaturity, boyishness long after boyhood, is common in homosexual men. Acquaintances found in Gordon a certain naivety, and engaging youthfulness. If there is such a quality as social immaturity, Gordon was an example of it. Mr. Nutting quotes a curious statement in a letter to a clergyman in which Gordon said that he had gone to the Crimea hoping to be killed. I wished I was a eunuch at 14. From this, Mr. Nutting speculates that Gordon may have discerned in himself a homosexual tendency which was repugnant to him, the repression of which fostered his death wishes. Richard Garrett, commenting on the same letter, surmises that Gordon may have had some disturbing homosexual experience at school. He concludes, however, that the evidence of Gordon's homosexuality is no stronger than Margot Asquith's suggestion that Gordon was a confirmed opium eater and consequently often muddled. Educated Sudanese assumed that Gordon was homosexual, just as Arabs were later to make the same assumption. About T.E. Lawrence, Anthony Nutting's opinion is that there is no more proof that Gordon ever practiced homosexuality than he ever had a sexual relationship with a woman. Charles Genevieve Trench's conclusion is on the same lines. That he ever was a practicing sodomite is extremely improbable. I am quite sure that they both must be right. Everything about Gordon pointed to the assumption that he would have abhorred physical contacts, but at the risk of being boringly repetitious, let me emphasize that this is the unimportant consideration beside the effect which homosexuality could have had upon his happiness and upon the pattern of his life. The picture of the single-hearted Christian crusader is, alas, a false one. His emotional life was one of torturing conflict. He knew himself well. He recommended marriage to his friends. To marry is the best thing a man should do, and it is one I recommend all my friends to do. But when he wrote, I could make no woman happy, he was surely not thinking only of his roving tendencies and love of living rough. It is a peculiarly sad admission by a man so universally esteemed by his compatriots. The prevailing ignorance about homosexuality among the general public in his day, and even among most doctors, though in their case it may have been turning a blind eye upon a distasteful subject, should increase our sympathy for Charles Gordon. He could turn to no one for help or advice, could consult no books for guidance, as a man with this problem could do today. I guess we're going on to this. Earl Kitchener of Khartoum. Or did I? I think I did him in parts before, but I'm not going to do that now. When does this end? 126. Earl Kitchener of Khartoum, 1850 to 1916. I should stop here. Is that what I did in the previous ones? Chapter 6. I don't know. That's what I did, bruv. I think I might have. Let's see what I did. Mars. Mars without Venus. Let's see how I did it. Chapter 5, Part 4. I don't know what I did, bruv, but let's see. Mars without Venus. Mars. Study of some ammo. Show all of them. And we want them in videos. Did I separate them by characters? Or did I do multiples? Guess we'll see here shortly. Yeah, I did. So I guess I'll stop here.